So let's find seats where you can. Just a few tips. The sound in this cavernous space is not always the greatest. Sound kind of bounces around. The best places to sit if you have hearing issues is near the speakers. We had a handful of hearing-assisted devices which went really quickly, as they often do. But we'll do our best to try to keep the mics close to our mouths so that you can hear us. And during the Q&A, I urge you to do the same. You have to treat it like it's an ice cream cone. We are recording this for Cape Ann TV, which will rebroadcast it. So you can always pick up a little of what you might not have heard by watching the TV. This is I'm billing this as our 99th. I've actually lost track because we co-sponsored some, we ran our own, but we're going to celebrate our 100th event next September at the first event of the 2018-2019 season, 17 years after we founded it. My name is Dan Cannell, and I chair the forum. Working with me are Carol Durga and Martha Kurtz, and Kathy O'Neill. Do I see Kathy in the, there she is over here. Jan Klein is up recording this for Cape Ann TV, and Sage Walcott is right up here in the front, and he'll be helping out with the Q&A afterward. So I want to thank them for all that they've done over the years to keep this going. And thank you all for coming out this evening. One of the worst things about rampant corruption is the cynicism it nurtures within the society and the way it seeps into our consciousness as normative behavior. At that point, we have two choices. We either join in or we fight it. Fortunately, we're at a historical moment where there is a tremendous amount of fight back taking place around the world, with popular movements challenging corrupt and ineffective leaders and their enabling parties in country after country across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Since our last forum, I've watched the resistance topple sitting prime minister in Ethiopia, where I was when it happened earlier this year, as well as in South Africa, both countries that I've followed closely for the last several decades. And corruption was really at the center of the movement to get them out. But we've also seen that public outrage, if not harnessed to a coherent, systemic alternative that can open the door to worse thieves and demagogues. Part of the problem is that we can get so consumed by outrage that we fail to grasp the depth and breadth of the problem and what's needed to get beyond it. What makes this forum so important, I think, is that we have a rare chance to step back from the daily news cycle and explore what it means when corruption doesn't just weaken the system, but becomes the system. First, however, a few bits of Cape Ann Forum business. If anyone here is not on our mailing list, please sign up at the table by the door. We send out letters twice a year asking for support and telling you what's coming up that season. We also send out postcards in the mail before individual forums, and we send out emails to everybody we have on the list every time we either run an event or co-sponsor one. And that's about it. We do not share the list or sell it to anybody. We're an all-volunteer organization with no paid staff and no corporate sponsors, so we do need your support, but we will not deluge you with appeals for it. You can also go to our website for information about future events and such things as articles and reports by former speakers and links to other organizations doing interesting work. We're very easy to find. It's just capeannforum.org, and if you forget that, just Google Cape Ann Forum. There's only one of us in the world. Yes. I also want to tell you about two events we're co-sponsoring but not organizing. One, on Sunday, May 20th at 6 p.m., two-time forum speaker Andy Basovich will be at the Gloucester Stage Company as part of a month-long program on combat art. art created by U.S. veterans that explores their experience both in and afterward. With an exhibit in war and afterward, with an exhibit at the Rocky Neck Cultural Center curated by local artist Ken Ruby, himself a Vietnam vet. On Sunday, June 3rd, 2 weeks after the Basevich event, at 6:30 p.m., the Cape Ann Cinema will screen the film Heart of Nuba, which follows Tom Katena, a remarkable doctor who runs a hospital in the war-torn Nuba Mountains of southern Sudan that serves an isolated population of nearly 1 million people. Tom's brother John, who lives in Rockport, will introduce the film, and Tom will Skype in for a Q&A with the audience, which is really a unique opportunity. I unfortunately will not be here. I'll be back in Ethiopia. I have to warn you, though, that this event, the Katena film, will almost certainly sell out before the doors open. So if you plan to go, don't show up without tickets. Get them ahead of time. You can do that either by going to the cinema on Main Street or by going to their website. You can get them directly there. And we will have information about this on our website, so you can find that there. We'll put it up later this week. Finally, I have an announcement that always comes up at the last forum of the season. This year's recipient of our $500 scholarship given to a graduating Gloucester High School senior, whom GHS teachers single out for outstanding efforts to increase awareness of international issues among their peers. This year's awardee is Caroline Enos, who's here tonight with her mom, Jane. Caroline, can you come up here? And her dad, too. I hadn't met her dad. So we have a certificate, but first the check. So let's see. Caroline Enos kept the Gloucester High School Human Rights Initiative going for the past school year and has been deeply involved with other extracurricular activities throughout her high school experience. In the words of her GHS advisor, quote, she not only strove to keep the human rights group going, but she's also been a strong and consistent voice for social justice in the school newspaper and other organizations. She really deserves recognition. I was scanning her clips at the Gillnetter, which is the high school newspaper today, and it's a remarkable list of issues and events over the past several years. Now, Caroline, you were the editor of the paper as well this year, yeah? Just a quick scan of some of the headlines. GHS student speeches from last week's walkout, and that was, of course, the walkout on gun violence, and one of the speeches was by Caroline. Democracy depends on freedom of the press, near and dear to my heart. Gloucester will be underwater in 100 years without climate change efforts. Think about that one. And what do international teens really think about America, which was based on a media course in Germany that she did last summer, in which she interviewed the other students about what they thought about what was going on here, and you can just guess what everybody talked about. On the basis of that article, she was a winner of a Scholastic Golden Key Award. And if you're not familiar with that, I took a look at some of the previous winners and alumni of those awards, and they include people like Truman Capote, Lena Dunham, and Ken Burns. We are really pleased to salute your work and recognize your contribution. Thank you. Now you can't go. We are really pleased at what she's done and look forward to watching what she does in future years. And I just wanted to give Caroline a minute or two to tell us a little bit about where she's headed. So, thank you.
All right, so hi everyone, I'm Caroline if you don't know already. So next year I plan to attend Suffolk University in Boston. I will be studying journalism and then hopefully a double major in American politics. I've always felt it's really important to try to understand other perspectives, especially when we're not really around them a lot. And so I'm really honored to receive this award, because this is a very empathetic organization, and it's an honor to receive it again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Many of you will remember Sarah Chayes from her incisive NPR reports from Afghanistan and Pakistan in the early days of the U.S. intervention. But after the Taliban fell, she stepped out of journalism to help rebuild the country, launching a manufacturing co-op called Argand, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, but where men and women worked together to produce skincare products. During that period, she dressed like a man, met warlords and opium dealers, and had meetings with President Karzai, among others. The result, according to one reviewer, was a clear-eyed and extraordinary book, The Punishment of Virtue, Inside Afghanistan After the Taliban, which was published in 2006. Chayes went on to serve as a special assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, focusing on governance issues, participating in cabinet-level decision-making on Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Arab Spring, participating and traveling, with Mullen to these regions. Most recently, she was a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where she deepened her ongoing research into systemic corruption, the focus of her last book, which looked at corruption at a global level, titled Thieves of State: Why Corruption Threatens Global Security. The book won the 2016 Los Angeles Times Book Prize. She recently left Carnegie to finish her next one, where she turns her lens onto the United States. But let's let her tell us all about it. I welcome Sarah Chayes.
So this is all Jan's fault, right? There she is, behind the, yay, Jan. So it's just a notebook, right? I actually love this because it allows me to kind of wander around like this. It's really great. I also want to say, I first want to say thank you all for being here, because man, we have a lot of words to metabolize these days, right? And the idea that you folks are spending a Sunday evening voluntarily being assaulted with more of them, I couldn't be more grateful to you. Delighted to be in Gloucester, where I lived for a while on East Main Street. And that was, as we've had dinner early on, has Sebastian been here at the forum? Sebastian Younger. Who's well known to this town, we were all out here together. So the perfect storm that he wrote the book about, we were all living here during the perfect storm, and that's when I lived on East Main Street. Unfortunately, I was working in the city, and it just was a little bit too far. So I'm just thrilled to be back in this great town. And I do want to talk about corruption. See, this is exactly what I was afraid was going to happen. I lost my page. Hang on one second. Where'd you go? There it is. Okay. Now I better get something to hold that down. I do want to talk about corruption. As a matter of fact, I'm going to talk for a while about corruption. But before I do that, I really want to take a little bit of a step back, talk about some of this stuff. Right? Money. Now, I get it, right? The root of all evil. It's not news that we've got a problem with this stuff. In fact, I've been looking back. Remember Midas? You know, Midas, here's a guy, he gets one wish. And he says, I want everything I touch to turn to gold. And he's delighted, right? Touch the microphone, it's gold. You know, touch Dan, it's gold, great, you know. Touch an apple, it's gold, uh-oh. Drink some water, it's gold, uh-oh. The guy goes directly back to the god and says, please, take this wish away. What's really interesting is that some of the most emblematic stories about money and about how problematic it is come at those moments. So I've been looking into this. Midas, it turns out, existed. He was a king of Lydia, He was a king of Phrygia, which is very close to Lydia. He basically invented coinage. I mean, they don't quite have it right. They don't quite have it hammered down, but it's within 20 or 30 years, within 20 or 30 miles. The guy invented the stuff. We are living in a period today where money has displaced other values as the way, right, to measure social achievement. It's supplanted things like wisdom and courage and creativity and dedication to the community and these other values that we pay lip service to, but in fact don't use to measure our social standing within society. And so if you think about the Midas story, it's pretty deep. It's not just that the guy was greedy. It's that everything of intrinsic worth was converted to this stuff called gold, that actually if you made your spearhead out of gold, you were going to lose the battle, right? I mean, gold has a marginal real value in the world. That's sort of what we're doing today in America, right? We're converting the land, what's on the land, what's under the land, the water, the air, human creativity, we're turning it into money, otherwise known as zeros in bank accounts. I mean, that's a pretty crazy race that we've gotten ourselves into. And that's what we're in. We're in a competition for zeros in bank accounts, and so it's not about need. That's why there's no such thing as enough, because it's about winning. To compete in this race, elites everywhere, in Ethiopia, just like in the United States, just like in Greece, just like in Afghanistan, are rewriting the rules, right? They're rewriting the rules, or they're selectively enforcing the rules that are written in order to benefit themselves, right, in their favor. Now, that's what ordinary people mean when they say the system is rigged. That's what people are talking about when they're screaming about the rigged system. The problem is that these same elites are narrowing the definition of a rigged system. They're narrowing the definition of corruption. So in the 2016 election, campaign, for me, the most significant event was not, the latest crazy thing that one candidate said or the latest leak of whatever. It was a Supreme Court decision in the end of June of 2016. Now, does anybody remember the abortion decision that day? There was a decision that struck down a law making it so. How many people remember that decision? The decision I was listening for was the striking down of the corruption conviction of Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. Anybody remember that one? Fewer. Fewer. That was an 8-0 decision. This guy had taken $180,000 worth of stuff, right? A ride in a Jaguar. Oh, the briber, took his wife out for a shopping spree that was worth $20,000 or $30,000. The daughter's wedding was paid for. There were loans. There were gifts in cash, etc. The guy bribing the governor ran something called Star Scientific that was making some tobacco-based, quote, dietary supplement that was supposed to help you. And of course, he couldn't market the stuff because he needed clinical trials. So he was trying to get, clinical trials done. So he's leaning on the governor to get the University of Virginia system to run clinical trials. And the governor, and the prosecutors got the call to the star scientific guy saying, you know what, I really need another $20,000. And 5 minutes later, the call to the state secretary of education, oh, you got to meet with this guy, you know, et cetera. And yet, 8-0, the Supreme Court decided that doesn't count as corruption. Why? Because calling up the state secretary of education doesn't, quote, count as an official act. So you have to be giving something of value in return for an official act. And the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, defined official act down to basically you have to give a subordinate an order to do something, or you have to vote in a certain way. In other words, you basically have to be so stupid that you should be put in jail for stupidity, because you have to essentially, sign a contract in order for this to count as bribery. And as I've looked, the Supreme Court opinion basically says, it's not the business of the court to concern itself with tawdry details like Rolexes and Ferraris. It's the business of the court to protect against the unbounded expansion of the federal bribery statute by the Department of Justice. In other words, it is of more danger to the United States that we punish corruption than that we have corrupt officials. I mean, it's this absolutely breathtaking decision. And to me, what's even more breathtaking is that, does anyone listen to the Diane Rehm show? It's off now, but it's another NPR show. It's down in D.C. She's from down in D.C., but it was a great, she's very thoughtful. She had the usual 3 experts, 2 constitutional law experts and 1 legal journalist. All 3 of them hastened to say they would have joined the decision. So, the elites are defining corruption down narrower and narrower and narrower. We also tend to think of it, when the Supreme Court says tawdry, and Diane Rehm's guests kept using the word sleazy. I mean, what's sleazy? Sleazy is something a little bit distasteful, right? Like, oh, let's avert our eyes, that's a bit sleazy. We think of it as something sort of isolated or individual. Oh, this particular governor did this sleazy thing. If you're interested in organized crime, right, the role of the corrupt officials is they're supporting actors, right? The star of the show is the organized criminal, is the drug dealer, and they're taking advantage of, a customs officer or a cop or something like that who's on the take. Or those of us who work in international affairs often hear about fragile and failing states, right? And so you have this fragile and failing government that somehow allows corruption to seep in. I would like to submit that all of these are completely insufficient ways of looking at the phenomenon. What we are actually looking at is an operating system of sophisticated networks that are not fragile and failing. Now, they're not doing a good job at governing, but they're not intending to govern. Their objective is maximizing resources. Or maximizing revenue streams for themselves, for network members. And so it's much, I think, more accurate to think of them, and this is a little bit provocative, but as very sophisticated and successful criminal organizations that are masquerading as governments. Governing is, at best, a front activity. The obvious point being governing is not the objective, this stuff is. What do I mean by network? Let me start with, again, the kind of cop on the street. So in Afghanistan or in Nigeria, or I don't know about Ethiopia because I'm not sure it quite works that way, but Afghanistan, you drive a couple of miles down the road and you're going to see, and it's usually like a 17-year-old cop with a Kalashnikov over his shoulder, walks out into the middle of the street, and basically you got to pay him to go past. And, if you don't, and I start Thieves of State with one of these examples where one of our cooperative members, former policeman himself, his brother actually, also former policeman, doesn't give the bribe and gets smacked in the face. And I'm like, wait, this is a young Afghan man. Did he punch the lights out of the cop? You know, I mean, like what? You know. So that's the guy on the street level, and they're shaking you down for a couple of cents hit, right? I mean, it's trivial stuff. The point is that money makes its way up the line. So that police officer, number one, has probably bought his job in the police. Now, why would you do that when the salaries are so low? Because of the opportunity for extorting, you know, motorists, right? But they owe part of the take up the line. You know the kids coming in from Central America? The, you know, unaccompanied minors, this migration crisis that kind of was big in 2014 hasn't gotten so much less big since, but it was the kids, like the caravan right now that came through Mexico. So I heard in the coverage about that, about, you know, gang extortion, right? The kids are being subjected to gang extortion. Is this better? I promised you I would check on the mic. Is this working like this? Gang extortion. So I spent a couple of days in Honduras, and I thought, wait a second, I bet I know how this works. The cops are outsourcing their extortion to the gangs. Sure enough. So the way it works is the cops let the gangs extort people so long as they kick back a part of the take. And it goes up the line, all the way up to the interior minister. Now, in Afghanistan, they've done bribery surveys. That's a relatively, you know, objective survey, meaning not how corrupt do you think the place is, but have you paid a bribe in the last month? How much? And then you do a little bit of, estimation based on that, based on the size of your sample and stuff like that. $2 to $5 billion a year in extorted bribery in a country as poor as Afghanistan. So you're talking a really significant revenue stream. That's what I mean by vertical integration of this network. In return for the money going up the line, impunity goes down the line. That's what holds the system together, is money goes up, and what goes down is guaranteed protection from any kind of legal repercussions. And that's what caused me to understand this, is when we started doing some anti-corruption or some corruption cases in Afghanistan, President Karzai threw himself across the railroad tracks to stop these cases from going forward. And it was some trivial border police idiot that why would President Karzai risk his reputation for this guy? And it's when you realize, oh my God, this is what holds the whole system together, just like the mafia. If you do, you know, ground level work for the mafia, if you get picked up, you sure will get the best lawyers, right? That's the deal. That's horizontal integration. Vertical integration. Horizontal integration. And now let's just have a weather mind's eye to Washington as I walk us through this, right? Okay. So we Americans love to think, we could argue all night about who's worse for your health, the public sector or the private sector, right? We see those as distinct in this country. We also see both of those, even though we might dislike either public sector or private sector more or less than the other as a general principle, but we think of them as licit actors, right? On the other side, we've got the bad guys, out-and-out criminals, right? Drug dealers, terrorists. That's on the other side. These networks weave across all of the sectors. So if you take Honduras, for example, let me take Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, the ruling family of Azerbaijan, shortly after the presidential inauguration in 2017, when Ivanka Trump got a position in the White House, the president of Azerbaijan appointed his wife vice president. The family owns 11 banks. They basically own the entire financial sector. So in Azerbaijan, you have an almost perfect overlap between the public and private sectors, right? Same with massive consortia. Again, just to have a little bit more of an American, you know this guy Agalarov, the famous Russian rock star who organized the, whatever, I see a lot of nodding heads. So it's the Russian rock star. He's actually from Azerbaijan. He is the son-in-law of Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan. So in fact, he is a bridge between the Azerbaijan network and the Russian network. And, you know, the Trumps are deeply involved in that place. Anyway, they also own these massive real kind of construction consortia. So if you look at a picture of Baku, you'll see these crazy skyscrapers. All of those are built by the consortia that belong to the president's family. So that's an example of almost perfect overlap between public and private sector. Honduras, not so clear. There's some overlap, but rather you have a kind of tissue of exchanges between public sector and private sector network members. What I'm trying to say is these networks are configured differently in different countries. They don't look identical everywhere. And I also want to insist that in every country, there are genuinely constructive, public-spirited people in nooks and crannies in these networks. Now, they're up against it. And they are marginalized to the degree possible and stuff like that. But I'm not trying to say these are just evil geniuses. You know, they're human institutions, so they're complicated. But the role of the network members who are in the public sector, meaning who hold government jobs, is to bend their agencies and institutions to serve the purposes of the network, not the purposes of the public. So some of the obvious ones that get taken and bent are the justice sector. As I just said, you have to, for the vertical integration, you have to guarantee impunity. That means you have to own the justice sector. So the first, you know, justice sector, either prosecutors or judges you have to own. And so the network goes after either the judges or the prosecutors, or if they can't completely capture the justice sector, they figure out ways to work around it. So President Sisi in Egypt, for example, has a pretty professional justice, you know, particularly judiciary bench. And so what he has spent a couple of years doing is expanding the jurisdiction of the military courts so that he can work around the civilian courts. But, you know, if you've been reading about judicial appointees or should we fire Rosenstein, you know, I mean, this fits exactly in the behavior of kleptocratic networks and the justice sector. Congress in Honduras, it's really, so what I would say is those elements of state function that you can't actually capture and weaponize, you know, try to work around and hollow out. And you can hollow them out by underpaying their employees, by not filling vacancies, by transferring people frequently or to undesirable positions. There are all kinds of ways to hollow out institutions. So you go to Congress in Honduras, and it's this dilapidated building. I was going to have some meetings with members of Congress. They don't have offices. They don't have a room, they don't have a conference room where they can meet you. So I was meeting with two members of the Honduran Congress. They had to camp out in the one meeting room that the entire Congress has in order to save it for our meeting. Then you go to the garage and look at the quality and the price of the cars. There's a very big difference between the quality of the cars and the quality of the building in Congress. And I found myself thinking about our quote-unquote gridlock in Congress. And I started to wonder, is that deliberate? In other words, are we living through an effort to capture Congress, or is there actually simply a desire to render Congress inoperable so that, you know, then it's the executive branch and the justice branch that essentially do the governing. And that's an idea that came to me in the last couple of days, and I thought, wow, that's pretty scary. Private sector, again, there are going to be different revenue streams that matter in different countries. In Tunisia, for example, it's actually a very interesting microphone, because if you get too close, you lose it, and if you get too far away, you lose it. So I see you having a hard time. Are you able to hear? Right there? Are you able to hear? No, behind you, the woman. Yeah, you. Okay. All right, so I'll try to get this. It's not me dropping my voice. It's the microphone that doesn't pick it up. It's a little, so just yell at me, like do this if you're not hearing, okay? So Tunisia doesn't have oil, unlike its neighbor Algeria. One of its most lucrative exports is dates, dried dates, the fruit. Which are, you break the Ramadan fast with dates, and in the Gulf in particular, there's a market for very high quality dates. And so, you know, dates are grown on palm trees in oases, and what's the constraint? The opposite constraint to what Gloucester has, it's water, right? Now, I had thought that date palms still just have their roots in the ground and they suck up water, right? No, we're in the modern world. You have irrigation, you have pipes. So who controls the water? The water department. So if you are President Ben Ali's son-in-law and you decide you want dates at a certain price, you go to the best grower of the best dates and you inform him how much you're going to buy his dates for. And if he kicks up a fuss, you turn off the water. It can get really diabolical. So there's a lot of different, you know, particular, obviously in, remember there's a criminal strand to these networks too, so narcotics is often a very important revenue stream. Khat in East Africa is an important revenue stream. But three show up in every single country I've looked at, and they are banking, energy, and high-end real estate. Again, let's just think as Americans. Banking, energy, high-end real estate. There's another element of the private sector that's important to bear in mind. Foundations, private NGOs, right? So in Uzbekistan, there was something called the Fund Forum that was run by Karimov's daughter, Gulnora Karimova. And, you know, she would encourage, you know, for example, foreign NGOs or foreign donors to put money into Fund Forum, which of course was a black box. Then there was the telecoms thing where the largest Swedish-Finnish telecom company decided to do a, quote, joint venture in Uzbekistan, which basically meant giving a 25% cut to Gulnora Karimova. And they thought, oh, if you do pay to play, once you pay, you get to play. Well, then they assume that once you're in the game, there are going to be rules. Wrong, right? So you're running a telecoms company, suddenly all the towers go down. You've got 250,000 customers screaming at you because they don't have any cell phone coverage, and you get a call saying, would you please deposit $300,000 into the Fund Forum, the charity run by Gulnora Karimova, right? You got to put the money in Fund Forum, and then, the towers go up, and your cell phone customers get their coverage again. So when the King of Morocco donates money to the Clinton Foundation, technically, US law may not be getting violated. Believe me, the King of Morocco thinks that he's bribing Hillary Clinton. So NGOs are a very significant element of these networks in every country that I've looked at. And then we get to things like enablers. And so I won't go into a lot of detail in this, but foreign development assistance ends up feeding a lot of these networks overseas because they've gotten incredibly sophisticated at capturing one of the biggest revenue streams coming into their country, which is foreign donor assistance, right? And so when I first was in Kandahar, President Karzai's brother says, you should get some contracts. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, you should get a road contract. And I said, this is Afghans for Civil Society. We don't build roads. He says, don't worry about it. You get the contract, I'll build the road. And so what he's saying is, I get the contract, I skim some money off the top, I give him the rest of the money, he takes the money, he spends less than he should on materiel, and he builds a crappy road that falls apart in 6 months. And that was happening all over the place. And so that's how development assistance money gets captured. And when it's development loans, as I found in Honduras, it's even worse because the development objectives get watered down even more. So, and the money gets layered, like the Finnish foreign ministry puts money in the Central American mezzanine infrastructure fund, but now they've put it with 12 other, quote, investors into this fund, so the Finnish citizens can't even find out what are the rules governing the investment of their money in development projects in Central America, and then who is actually investing CAMEF funds? It's some private equity firm in Washington that also is investing the money of the Sultan of Brunei. I mean, what kind of development outcomes are you gonna get in that kind of a situation? But enablers are also, you know, Yale University decides to give an honorary degree to the former Minister of Finance of Nigeria, Ngozo Iweala. You know, female finance minister, big African country, just this little problem. The Nigerian government lost $1 billion a year of oil revenues. They just kind of walked away while she was, $1 billion a month for 19 months. And that was the period that her colleague, the governor of the central bank, was actually looking at the accounts. And he stopped. He just arbitrarily chose a 19-month period, $1 billion a month for 19 months in Nigeria. And I'm not saying she stole the money, but she didn't say anything about it. When he got fired for blowing the whistle on it, she didn't say a word, and she's never said anything negative about that government ever. And Yale University decides she's the one who needs an honorary degree. What's really important to remember is these people need their images laundered at least as much as they need their money laundered. I hate to do this, but Jones Day, big fancy law firm in Washington, who are they representing? The Trump campaign. And I'm not saying this, the issue is not politics. It's not about, do you represent a Republican campaign or a Dem? That's not the issue. The issue is integrity. Is this, you know, and so wouldn't it be interesting if, you know, someone like the the finance minister of Nigeria couldn't find a high-class lawyer to represent her? Like, that would start changing people's behavior. And I get it, there's an argument that says, you know, lawyers need to, you know, represent people on both sides, and that's right. But when it's a civil case, you actually don't have to take the case. You don't have to represent someone that you think it's ethically impossible for you to represent them. Anyway, enablers, it's a very, and the more you look into it, the more layers of, I mean, they're the active enablers, which is, you know, the lawyers who are opening the shell companies and the real estate developers who are taking people's dirty money and not looking too hard at where the money comes from. Those are the active ones, but there are lots of passive enablers that allow these systems to function. Let me go back to Jones Day. So that McDonald case that I mentioned, It's the final case in a series of cases, and we all know Citizens United, which is one of those cases, but this is a series of cases that did away with the legal doctrine that said Americans have the right to what's called the honest services of their political or governmental officials. That used to be a doctrine. There was an intangible right to the honest service, meaning that your government official is serving the public interest, not his or her personal interest. That was a right. The Supreme Court in this series of cases has declared that we don't have that right. That right doesn't exist. We have the right to have public officials who have not committed bribery in the incredibly narrow way that they've now defined bribery, but we don't have the right to officials, I mean, because that's too vague. So there's a lawyer at Jones Day who has argued, first he argued the first case in this series on the side of the government against the corrupt officials. Then he got out of government, joined Jones Day, and of course he's now argued the other side on two of them. And he has a very strong legal view on the statute is just stupidly vague. I mean, it's terrible that we have the system that we do, but this statute is too vague. It's such an interesting, I mean, I'm sitting with the guy and I'm just perplexed because he says, you know, we have the system, and I want to say, who's we? Who's we? It's lawyers like you arguing the other side of these cases that gave us this system. I'm going to come back to him and actually ask him that. I didn't at the time. But the point is, you know, and then he looked at me and he said, wow, congratulations for doing something constructive. And I thought, now what's the difference between you and me? You have chosen to make your business model and your living off of reinforcing this system that you then decry. You know, how terrible this is. But too bad, this is the system we have, so I may as well make a killing at it. And you are, you know, senior partner at Jones Day, which has a building like a government building in downtown Washington. That's what I mean by enablers. I mean, it's a soft thing. He's obviously not doing anything illegal. And yet, he has chosen to expend his intellectual energy reinforcing and defending the system that he decries. This system is ideology-free. Kleptocrats, and that's what makes it also quite I want to say deceptive, right? Kleptocrats are not, they're not proclaiming some worldview, right? It's not communism. They're not armed. And so they've been able to infiltrate a lot of our societies and, oh man, so I'm being told 5 minutes. I've gone on a little bit too far, but I do, there's a little bit, you're gonna bear with me just a little bit, right? It's what makes it very deceptive. You know, we say terrorism is a threat and the enemy, and I think this is a more dangerous one because it's so invisible, because you see it. You know, in Latin America, right-wing regimes and left-wing regimes are characterized by the same types of kleptocratic practices. You have secular regimes in the Middle East and, you know, the Ayatollahs in Iran, characterized by the same type of kleptocratic practices. So it is very deceptive. I think another critical characteristic to bear in mind is it is not victimless. And so let me just tell the story, a Nigeria story, about having this conversation with some legal professionals in Nigeria about where are the toll booths, you know, in the legal profession, where are people shaking people down? And a prosecutor says, Sarah, it's not just money. you've been talking about this stuff all the time. It's not just this stuff. And he tells me the story about the lady whose husband is diabetic. He's in preventive detention, and she says, I have to get him his medicine. Let him free on bail. I guarantee I will deliver him to the courtroom. The judge takes advantage of her. Me Too world, right? I should have thought of that. Of course. It's called sextortion. It happens everywhere. It doesn't only happen to women. There is male-on-male sextortion also, which in Muslim countries can be exceedingly, in terms of dignity, just as serious as an issue as it is when it's happening to women. And as a female, I'm very upset about it. As a security professional, I'm thinking about her brother. What does he want to do when his sister gets raped by the judge? He wants to shoot the son of a gun, right? Just like my cooperative member who gets smacked in the face by the cop in Kandahar, what does he want to do? He wants to kill the cop. Well, in Kandahar and in northern Nigeria, there is a violent insurgency standing in the wings who wants nothing more than for you to shoot the cop, right? And not only do they offer you the opportunity, they offer you the argument, which is the reason our government is so corrupt is because the government officials don't believe in God. And if only our government were organized according to God's law, they couldn't possibly be this corrupt. Now, it's a spurious argument. You just have to look at Iran, or ISIS to see that it's a spurious argument. But you are a furious 19-year-old Nigerian. You're not doing comparative political analysis, right? It's a pretty convincing argument. And if you read Thieves of State, and in deference to the 5 minutes that happened 10 minutes ago, I am going to spare you this, but just read the 95 Theses. Go back home tonight and Google the 95 Theses, Martin Luther. Like 81 of the 95 Theses are about corruption. And oh, by the way, the Reformation was not a peaceful event. It was a violent religious insurgency run by militant, puritanical, activists, right? And oh, by the way, the United States government is a descendant of that revolution, right? I mean, John Locke, a Puritan, said, when there is a barefaced wresting of the law to basically serve, I think he uses indemnify or something like that, but to serve a man or a party of men, to serve the kleptocratic network, war is made on the sufferers. War is made on the sufferers, who, lacking an appeal on earth to right them, are left to the only remedy in such cases, an appeal to heaven. So John Locke, the forefather of our constitutional thinking, is saying people are going to turn to violent religious insurgency, or they often will, in cases of severe corruption. So that's how you get the Taliban and Boko Haram and ISIS and those guys. And you also get revolution. You were talking about the toppling of the prime minister. We had the whole Arab Spring. We had the Maidan Revolution in Ukraine. And along with South Africa and Ethiopia, we have Burkina Faso, and we have South Korea, and we have Guatemala, and we have Brazil, and we've got, this is the #1 cause of the overthrow of governments at the moment. Iceland also lost their prime minister over the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers. And so when I wrote Thieves of State, I was thinking hard security issues like this, like the Taliban, like extremism, and like revolution. But now I really think it's corruption itself that's the security threat. And we're up against it in the United States today. We are in the thick of it right here and now. And in my view, it is the biggest threat to government by and for the people of our generation. If we believe in that type of government, by and for the people, no matter what our political persuasion, Democrat or Republican, we have got to fight for it. And what does that mean? It means, #1, Let's stop turning a blind eye to our own side sins. It's easy for me to point at the Trump administration because I can see the patterns. But let's look at the Clinton Foundation. Let's look at Wall Street. Let's look at the takeover of the economic policy of this country under presidents, Democrat as well as Republican. And vice versa. If you are Republicans in the room, don't just be pointing at Hillary. Yeah, I got you on Hillary, but look at your own side too. Let's start with examples from our own side, whichever side we're on. We gotta get the money out of politics. So what I would recommend you could start it here in Gloucester. Do a small contribution pledge. No corporate PAC pledge. Sign up candidates at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and, band together as citizens of Gloucester and say, you know what? Democrat or Republican, we are not voting for you if you don't sign this pledge, and then hold them to it. Make it a single issue, because every other political issue flows from money in politics. If we can't clean up the system, then the policy issues are skewed by the rigged system. And then the last point is, it's not enough to topple an individual. And this is what I've seen, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in Ethiopia, but in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Guatemala, in Brazil, leaders were toppled, but the network reconfigured. So Marilyn and I were walking on the waterfront, and we were watching the nets, looking at the nets being rolled, spooled up on the boats. And I'm thinking, wow, a fish net is an incredibly strong structure, right? If what is it, like the loop of a fish net breaks, yeah, that loop is broken, but the rest of the net retains its integrity. That's a network, and the network will sacrifice a loop. So the network in Egypt sacrificed Mubarak. Look at today. It's even more robust today than it was before the revolution of 2011. In Guatemala, they got a comedian who was easily captured by the network. And so we Americans have to be really careful about focusing on individuals. We have to think about what are the systemic reforms, because the window of opportunity when it comes is going to be short. The network is going to reconfigure fast. And so we've got to get as excited about what can sometimes feel technical as we are, number one, about individuals, and number two, as we are about our identity grievances. And that's the point I'd like to leave you on, is as I've looked at anti-corruption protests worldwide, and I looked at 7 countries on practically 7 continents. I mean, it's countries as diverse as Guatemala and Brazil, Burkina Faso, South Korea, South Africa, Romania, very diverse countries. The most effective way that the network fights back is to activate the identity divides. And the countries with the deepest and bitterest identity divides are the ones where the kleptocratic network succeeded and maintained itself. We have to realize, so I come to you from West Virginia. I was driving around western West Virginia in places where the median income is $10,000 plus per household, and where frack trucks are driving through people's cars, and the people just feel like they have to get out of the way. And as one of them said, we just feel like we don't matter. And I'm thinking, that's exactly what we're hearing from Baltimore and St. Louis. We don't matter. And yet those 2 constituencies, the people getting shot down in the streets of Baltimore and St. Louis, and the people being driven through in the back roads of West Virginia, have been, their identity divides have been activated such that they can't even be in a room together. They see each other as antagonists to each other when they are suffering the exact same impacts of this system. So let's do whatever we can to not fall for the activation of our identity divides. Thank you very much indeed.